Welcome to our Appalachia. My name is Phil Conn. I'm your host for this series. Today we're going to discuss early businesses in Morehead, Kentucky. We have as our guest Mr. Bob Bishop, who has been a businessman in Morehead for a long time. As a matter of fact, Mr. Bishop was born in Morehead. He is an alumnus of Morehead State, and he has been a druggist in this area for some time, and also is well known in Rowan County as a cattle farmer. We'll have him tell us about that briefly as well today. Mr. Bishop, when were you born in Morehead?
1911, August 8th, 1911.
1911. So you've been around for most of this century,
Yeah.
and I guess you've seen a lot of businesses come and go. You've seen a lot of business practices come and go. Tell us how you got into the drugstore business. And
Well, actually, the drugstore I operated was established in 1896. It's the oldest continuous business in Rowan County. I kid my banker friends about that. I say, well, we got here before you did. They got a lot more than we did of it, but we got it. And my dad started in 1896, whose name was C.E. Bishop, under whose name we still operate the drugstore. In 1930, my father died, and I assumed control of the drugstore, which was then owned by my mother. And so I've been at it ever since. We started down on what's known as First Street now, right across from the passenger depot. And in 1932, I believe, or maybe first part of 33, we moved to Main Street and moved to the building that was then known as Consolidated Hardware Building. The room was in then is the room that is occupied now by Pelfrey's Ladies Shop. And then several years later, we moved across the street to when McKinney built the new building on the corner where we are now. And we've been there ever since.
But now, when you went into the drugstore business on what is now First Street, that was Railroad Street. And at that time, most businesses in Morehead were right down across from the railroad tracks,
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah, most of the business, retail business, was on First Street, or Railroad Street as is known then. Both your banks was there, your restaurants were there, your groceries was there, your wholesale grocers, which was a big business, was there, and the only manufacturing thing they had was the old Cosmograph company that made motion pictures, was on First Street or Railroad Street. And that was primarily the only business then that was on Main Street was Consolidated Hardware, which is in the building we moved to after it was remodeled, and McKinney's, which was in the location we now are in, and then Blair Brothers, those were department and grocery stores. And then where the old Middle Trail Hotel is and where First Federal Saving is now was a big livery stable. And then up in the east end of Morehead, across from the courthouse, there was a grocery store and a general store. And that was about all there was on Main then.
Now, you mentioned a livery stable. Of course, the fact that businesses were along Railroad Street speaks to the importance of railroads in that time. But I guess horse transportation was also very critical. In the 20s, automobiles had been invented, but there were very few in Morehead, I take it.
No, the big reason for the livery stables in Morehead was that salesmen would come in by the C&O Railroad, and they would rent a horse and go out and see rural stores. Rural stores in those days and time were big business. They was located in various parts of the county and did big business. The livery stable had that business, and they also rented buggies if fellow wanted, or a wagon, if in those days and times sailed and carried trunks, with their merchandise, especially clothing and dry goods. And so the livery stable business was quite a going business then.
Now, a lot of traveling salesmen did come by railroad then to Morehead and went from Morehead to towns like Sharkey, Haldeman, Triplet area,
Ellettsville,
Cranston. But you're suggesting that the grocery business was more decentralized in, say, the 20s and 30s than it is today. Of course, there were no supermarkets.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But
Now, the rural stores, which did tremendous volume, as we knew volume then, were where most of the groceries were sold then, you know.
so people didn't come into Morehead every day for this and that.
No, like most towns, people in the rural section, the farmers, and would come in on Saturday. That was the day that they come to town on Saturday, and then that's when they bought supplies. Hardwares where they'd come to hardwares to buy equipment, and then the feed mills, they come to get feed, you know, and feed mills.
Let's take a typical general store, any general store in the county. What type of merchandise was carried by a large general store in, say, the 30s?
You're talking about the rural
area.
Oh, they were really general stores. They all carried groceries, and they carried small hardware, and carried nails, and they carried work shoes and work clothing. That was primarily what they did. They carried some dry goods, some. That was primarily what they were. But that, you know, that's the basics after all. That's what people bought then.
But now you refer to work clothes. So if folks wanted a fancy pair of shoes, they would generally come to a larger area.
Yeah, if they wanted their Sunday clothes, they wanted a suit, you know, their Sunday suit, they'd come. Or if they wanted what they call the dress-up shoes, of course they'd come in to the town and get it in department stores. Your selection is much greater, and styles is a little bit more up style. The shoes you bought in real stores were really work shoes, you know, and you bought boots there, and that day and time they wore a lot of boots.
Your typical general store, though, in Morehead would not have been unlike a general store, say, in Farmers in the 20s or 30s.
No, it is very similar. You would, in fact, there was rural stores that whose inventory was equal to the stores in town.
What about drugstores, though? There, of course, were not drugstores countywide.
No.
What were the main things you did in the 30s in the drug business, and how did your business differ from drugstore operations today?
Well, of course, you sold more drugs. You sold a lot of crude drugs, you know. A lot of people bought a lot of old remedies, you know, and
these are what we call patent medicines.
Well, yeah, and then, you know, things like yellow root and rhubarb and stuff like that, you know, they bought it. A lot of people made their own drugs, camphor, you know, they'd take camphor gum and get whiskey, you know, and make their spirits of camphor, you know, and then, of course, the drugstores, they had a lot of different variety. You sold, most all of them had candies, you know, and they had stationery, and they had what greeting cards you had then, you know, and they carried various items like it. They was in a lot of fields that they'd gotten out of since I've been in, gotten back into. Now you can go into the, you know, big chain drugstores, and you can buy anything you want there. A lot of things you don't have a need for, but you can get anything in them.
To what extent in the 30s were people dependent upon a doctor's prescription to get certain hard drugs?
Well, that they had to. Of course, there was doctors in some in the rural areas that you know, carried their own medicine, but if you you know, if they had to have really a drug, you did a lot of compounding in those days. You made a lot of solutions, and you made a lot of capsule, and you folded a lot of charts. You made suppositories, and you know, if you had to have those type of drugs, you just had to go to a drugstore.
And you were preparing drugs then just as well as you were retailing drugs.
Oh yeah.
You had to make up the compound.
Yeah, made up a lot of them.
Tell us about the control, though, of drugs. I've heard that certain hard drugs were much easier to get then, you know, painkillers particularly, than
of course, the Harrison Narcotic Act, which took the drugs that was derivative of the poppy plant, your morphine and codeine and drugs of that. I think that went into effect in 1912, but I've heard my father tell about they sold morphine just like you sold aspirin. And in my days in the drug business, you sold phenobarbital, seconal, Tuinal, all those drugs that are now under very restrictive lists. You sold them just right over the counter. If I come in and buy him a dozen phenobarbital just like he could buy a dozen aspirin.
So back then there was potential for drug abuse if people didn't handle it properly.
I don't think they had as much of it.
Right. Of course, a lot of jokes about people taking alcohol for medicinal purposes. When I was a kid, I remember Hadacol was making the rounds. A lot of people would drink Hadacol that didn't approve of drinking liquor. But during the Prohibition era, it was common for people to purchase spirits for medicinal purposes at drugstores. Is that true?
Yeah, you could buy you could buy the brand name liquors on prescription. Just like you know, the same brands, many of the brands that's still on the market.
So distillers stayed in business, but only for medicinal.
Oh yeah, and yeah, they could only sell to not every drugstore. Just being a drugstore didn't allow you to. You had to take out special license, and the doctor had to write the prescription for whiskey on a special blank, government blank. So, but it always was available, and of course, the theory was that it was just available for medicinal purposes, but it didn't always work out that way.
Right. Well, I've heard enough jokes about taking little spirits for medicinal purposes to assume that there was a little room for abuse there from time to time.
Yeah.
What about any early centers for entertainment in town? Were there any?
Well, the first entertainments really, we had motion pictures called Nickelodeon, and then the first one I ever went to, you had benches, kind of like, just stack, you know, there wasn't any seats, they were just benches, and then of course you came into regular motion pictures, you know, and Cozy Theater was probably the first really legitimate theater in Morehead, and you only had one projection, and so between reels, you changed reels. I worked in one of them, worked in Cozy Theater, and when the reel run out, you had to wait and take the reel and put the new one in. You didn't have but one projector, so you always had just a few minutes in between reels. So,
were there any pool halls early here, or was that?
Well, pool halls they weren't looked on favorable, and for many years the city licensed the pool halls so much table, the thing that they kept them out of the town.
Too expensive to pay.
Yeah, they couldn't make a profit on it. You had to go to Haldeman or Farmers to play pool then.
And of course, you've told me that over the years there have been attempts to have bowling lanes, but there aren't any commercial establishments now.
They have. They used to have the first bowling lane, I guess they had down on Main Street. It was kind of an open air sort of thing. It was covered. It had a cover on it, but the sides were open. And then a group of men built the bowling alley that's located to the back, kind of behind or to the side of where Jerry's is now. And it was a real modern bowling alley. Bowling just didn't seem to, it wasn't very successful business here.
Tell me about the early hotels. Of course, we don't have anything called a hotel in town now. We have motels.
Well, for many years, the two hotels in town was the People's Hotel, which is located on Railroad Street. And I'm not sure, I tried to recall. I know it was 3 stories, and I think it was probably 4 stories, and it was quite a hotel. It was a big building from Morehead then.
Now this was mainly to accommodate traveling salesmen.
Yeah, salesmen stayed there. They come in on the railroad and they stayed there, and they'd stay maybe a week or so, sometime longer than that, and go out all through the county. And in fact, they'd go up as far as, you know, to Sandy Hook and they went to Farmers, and they went to Haldeman, and they'd go to all these places that weren't on a railroad, that didn't have a railroad. That's the way they get to them, you know. And then the other hotel was across the railroad, called Cottage Hotel. It wasn't anything like as big, but those two hotels, and then the really first modern hotel I guess we had was Mill on Trail. John Cecil came to Morehead many, many years ago and established the Mill on Trail Hotel. The building's still there. Well, where the First Federal Savings is was a frame building where Dr. Blair had an office, and that was converted into hotel, that big frame building. And then he later built the building you see now that is called Mill on Trail Hotel. In its day, was a pretty nice hotel.
Other than retailing, were there any wholesale operations in Morehead that served northeastern Kentucky?
Two big wholesale groceries, Caudle Blair on First Street, and then Morehead Grocery Company, which was operated by the Tollivers. Marion Tolliver established that, which was, you know, a well-known character, a well-known businessman, well-to-do businessman in those times. And Caudle Blair was operated by C.P. Caudle, who was the son of Roger Caudle, the former president of the People's Bank of Morehead. They were big businesses, and the Morehead Grocery is where Union Grocery is today, and they were big business.
What types of things would a hardware store carry, say, in the 20s and 30s?
Well, of course, the hardware, that's about the only place that you had your furniture. They handled furniture, and refrigerators and stoves and all kinds of hardware equipment, fencing, nails, plows. They were big, you know, everything was done by horse and mule then. They had all kinds of plows, your turning plows, your hillside plows, your cutter stock. And, you know, it was, the building their main store was in, then they always had a big warehouse where they carried this heavier type merchandise.
So if you wanted farm equipment, you could find a lot of it at hardware stores, but now you suggest that feed mills were handled separately from hardware operations in many cases. We had one feed mill and grocery here, made flour, and that's where they bought really feed, mixed feed for animals, and that's where they had their corn ground for flour, but now generally
flour for meal.
Right. Did you generally pay a fee for milling, or?
Oh yeah, they had a toll, or what they call a toll. You'd bring in so much corn if you was having. Of course, most of it was made in the mill. Corn, well, all corn was made in the mill. You brought in so much corn, they took out a certain percent for what they did. You didn't pay any cash. You just paid a toll. You gave up so much of your corn for the meal you got.
When did businesses start moving in large numbers from Railroad Street to what is now Main Street?
I'd say from 32 or 3 on up, from then on, it was a gradually exodus from railroad. As the trains become less important, then seemed like the cars got more prominent. They went to Main as Main Street.
Of course, Railroad Street is a pretty good distance from the Morehead State campus. Did the pool of Morehead State make a difference, do you think?
Oh yeah, probably, yeah. I'd say very definitely did. The tendency was to, well, the university and the college being the important thing in the community, and students was, good customers. It's just natural business locates where the traffic is, and the nearer they got to the students, the better off they were.
You know, a lot of services we take for granted anymore, I don't guess were in great abundance or didn't even exist as they do today back in the 30s. Tell us, for example, about the mortuary business, what we now call funeral homes. How was that provided for?
Of course, back there then, you had what they called undertakers who sold caskets, and they weren't embalmers. That wasn't done through this part of the country. And the fellow that sold you a casket, he had a horse-drawn hearse, and so he'd sell you the casket, and of course the bodies were kept in the homes. They weren't taken to any funeral home. They kept in the homes, and that's really what it was. It was many years before we had what they called a Lassen embalmer. That's not what they call them now, but that's what they call them then.
Now, your grandfather, wasn't he a coffin maker?
Oh yeah, he made furniture and he made coffins, and
so really that was a sideline. It was kind of an addition to the furniture business.
Yeah, it was. I'd say, you know, like, it was probably a pretty important part of it. And he had a horse-drawn hearse and tall hat he wore for when he drove the hearse. You know, that was the way they did. And you know.
Tell us about the early restaurants and the way people prepared and sold food, say in the 30s.
Well, you had more or less conventional, more or less what they'd call home-style restaurants. You know, of course, people didn't eat in restaurants when I was a kid. You know, now you did have what they call boarding houses, people who would fix meals on Sunday. That was primarily when they did. That's what, you know, when I was growing up, we'd go to a certain place, and there you'd eat Sunday dinner. You went to church, Sunday school and church, and then after that, you went to a boarding house and had dinner. You just had one good meal a day.
So local people would eat out maybe once a week, but probably a boarding house after Sunday work.
Yeah, you didn't. Restaurant business wasn't a big thing. I guess
traveling salesmen.
I guess traveling salesmen created Morehead and more of the business for restaurants. And
what about students, though? Were they attracted to the restaurants down on Railroad Street early on, or did they?
I doubt so. I don't think so. I think that they ate in the university dining rooms as you know, as the other restaurants came in. Eagle's Nest was a quite famous restaurant in Morehead, had almost national reputation, and then they catered to students, catered to everybody, but they catered to students, and that kind of, they drifted to restaurants, but that was way later, you know.
So as we know it, the fast food business is something brand new that you've seen develop in your lifetime, of course.
In fact, just a few years back, as far as I can recall, Jerry's was the first national fast food people that came to Morehead, so you know, they haven't been established too many years. That's really recent, and of course, as you know, McDonald's and places like that have just been established in the last 4, 5, 6 years.
Right. You have already mentioned that farmers came to town on Saturday to buy things they needed and to socialize. Tell us briefly, though, about Court Day. We think of Mount Sterling.
Well, they had Court Day once a month, and they come in, and as I say, I was born. Our home was located where the Dorn University Student Center is right now, and of course, in that day and time, you know, you didn't have stock laws. Cattle run out in the streets, you know, and so everybody had a fence, and they
you fenced them out instead of fencing them in.
You fenced. That's right. You fenced them out, and they traded around the courthouse, old courthouse that you all know, and they'd tie the horses and everything up to the fence. You know, it's hard to maintain the fence, you know, because the horses get scared, you know, and they come in, they traded horses, traded dogs, traded guns, and they farmers would bring you know, produce in and sell it on court days, you know, and it was quite an event, you know.
Right. A lot of trading among farmers with knives or dogs or whatever. But horses. I guess businessmen look forward to having court day as well.
It brought people into town, you know. And that's it was quite a business.
How big of it? And of course, I don't know. I haven't gotten too heavy into your politics. I don't know if this would color your answer anyway. But how big of an impact, a negative impact, did the Great Depression have on Morehead businesses?
Well, really, I was in business. I went in business in 30, and so Depression started in 29, and we really knew. I never knew of anybody hungry. I never knew anybody starving. I never knew anybody going out for food. You know, it you know, you didn't do as much business. Of course, you didn't have as much money, not as much money available, but most people, you know, they depend on a farm economy, and although, you know, prices went down, they didn't buy as much, but we didn't have any industry. We didn't have a great unemployment lines, you know, and so...
I guess what you're saying is, during the Great Depression, the best place to be was in a small town or an agrarian setting where you could have a big garden and had never learned to depend on cash money.
Yeah, I think you know, back in my day when I was growing up, I don't guess there's a family that lived in town that didn't have a garden. I've always said that the reason I got into the drug business was because I didn't like to garden. My brother, I had one brother and two sisters, and on Saturday, you had your choice. You could go to the drugstore and work all day, or you'd work in the garden a half a day. And so I chose the drugstore. I'd rather work in the drugstore one day than I would the garden half a day.
Well, anyone that's done any hard hoeing knows exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's real odd, though. My brother worked in the garden, and I worked in the drugstore, and he later went on. He went and studied accounting and was with U.S. Steel until he retired in the accounting field. He just, you know, after he got out and didn't have to work in the garden anymore, he didn't want anything to do with the garden. He didn't have anything. And I ended up in the farm business.
Right. Well, Mr. Bishop, thank you very much. The time has certainly slipped away from us. I want to thank you for being our guest, and again, Mr. Bob Bishop, who is a local druggist, and I want to encourage you to join us again as we take up another interesting aspect of our Appalachian culture and heritage. Thank you.